Hey guys, so welcome back to our tutorials. In today's tutorial, we are going to create this login page. So if you view this in a desktop, this should be a full page. But now because the screen size is less, we're going to work with this. So let's get started. So the very first thing you can see here, we have two sections. One of the sections is occupied by the image, and the left-hand section is occupied by the content. So whenever you are trying to design some pages using HTML and CSS or in either other framework, always think about these layouts as sections. So for instance, you can see we have one section here. Then we have two more sections, this left-hand section and the right-hand section. And then in the left-hand section, we have other elements, the login, the description, the input, all these. You can see like here we have two sections, the left section and the right section. Here we have two elements, the login with Facebook, Google. And this is how you think about whenever you come to a design. And also you might realize that this section is a bit bigger than the right hand section. So let's get started. So the very first thing we always do, we have a style.css file, which is empty. We have an index.html, which is also empty. The first thing we link the CSS to the document. So you have to link the CSS to the HTML document. Other than that, then your document would be found. The next thing we need is that we need to create this. It looks like a card, but we can give it a new name. Today we are going to use a login. So the very reason we use classes, I saw someone ask, is because you want to uniquely identify an element. So how do you do that? You either add a class, you either get it by the tag name. This one is by the tag name, or you can use an ID. So we could say ID of login, but an ID is a lot more specific. So commonly you just use a class. So because a class you can give multiple elements, but an ID it's one uniquely identified elements. All right. So for instance, if you want to understand about classes and IDs, is that a class can be used as a group. For instance, if you are in school, you might be in a class called 1W. So that's a class, and 1W does not represent an individual person. 1W will now represent the whole class, everyone. So if I say all 1W's students will get a laptop, then every student inside that will get a laptop. If I do the same, but now if I want a specific student to get a laptop, I'm going to use an ID. So maybe this is like the index number of that student. This is like, this is the index number basically. So uniquely identify an element. This same scenario is what is adopted in the HTML documents. So enough of the talks. Let's continue and see how we can create this. As we said, we have two sections. We have the left-hand section and the right-hand section. So we are going to create two sections inside this class. The first section, we are going to give it a class of content, because this is like a content, and then the other one we are going to give it a class of image wrapper. So normally you don't want to, because images are inline elements. Inline elements means that this element does not take up the full width, it just takes the space that is allocated to it. We'll talk more about that later, but now let's use a div with a class of image wrapper. Inside here is where we are going to create the image, which is this image. So the next thing before I forget is that let's create a folder called images. And then here we are just going to drag all the assets that we are going to use. And also something else you might notice in the icons, I'm not going to use the original icons I'm not going to use the icons provided by Font Awesome. I'm going to use SVGs. And in that, because I'm not going to use these icons, I don't need to import an icon library. So let me show you the assets. So I'm just going to copy all these assets. So these are the assets we are going to use. The arrow light. This is the arrow light. And then the Facebook icon, the Google icon, and the background image. So if you need these exact icons, you can go to my GitHub repository. My GitHub repository is github.com/techwithtwin/TikTok-projects. So the same way I'm pronouncing it. And then look for a project called, this project is called login form v2. we did have a version 1, so we can go to the login forms. So let's look for L. So this one is login form v2. Click there, and then you'll find all the images here. I'll try to attach this repositories link here in the description of the video. So do that, and then let's continue. So the next thing we want to do is that we're just going to link the image we just imported. So I'm just going to do images, and then I want the ocean image dot jpg. We can add an alt, so we can say ocean image. And then let's go back to the content, because this is where everything lies. So the very first thing in the content we want to add is the heading. So I'm going to use a heading level 2. So we're just going to type out heading level 2 and say log in. This is exactly what is here. And then the next thing after the heading is a paragraph tag with a description, which looks like a description. So we can give it a class of description. And then I'm going to copy this description and paste it in that description tag. So I used a div. I want to change this to a paragraph, not a div. The next thing we need is the input. So we just create an input. It's pretty straightforward. So we can say input type email. This is an email. We don't need the name. We don't need the ID, because we are not going to submit this form. This is just the UI. All right. And then the placeholder, this is the placeholder you are seeing here inside. So the placeholder should be, let's create the placeholder. We can say placeholder is equals to enter your email address. All right, we have the input. Let's continue to the next section. The next section now, this is not an individual element. We cannot say this is a paragraph. This is another container that we are going to create that holds two elements inside it. So we can go here after the input. Let's create a div. And we are going to call it reset, because this is the div that will contain the text forgot password and the button that said next. So inside here, we are going to create two elements. The first element is the forgot password paragraph. So we can say forgot password. And then the next element is just a button. Just create a button. And then this one says next. Something else you might realize is that this button has another element. So you can think as a button as still as a container that has two elements. So we cannot just create like this, because we want to style them. So we are going to create a paragraph inside the button, and it will say next. After that, we need this arrow right icon. This arrow right icon. So I'm going to use an image to show it, but you could paste that SVG here, but I don't want to do that. So the icon is images arrowright.svg. All right. And we are done with that section. We can close that section. Let's continue down. We have a horizontal line. So to create a horizontal line in HTML, just use HR. Right. Let's continue to the next section. We have a paragraph. So we just create a paragraph. We just copy this and create a paragraph and say P, and then paste that in. All right. So it's very straightforward. The next thing you might realize is that now we have another section with two elements. So we cannot just create one element. So we are going to create a div and give it a class of social login. Inside the social login, we have two buttons. So we can create those buttons. So we can say btn times 2. And this one will create us two buttons. All right, so inside these two buttons, what do you see? We have an icon and we have the text. So we need two more elements inside each button. So the first element has an image. This image is the Facebook icon. So we go to images, then Facebook SVG. After the Facebook SVG, we have another element, which is a paragraph text. Then we can say P and then say Facebook. I hope you can see how we are going. Then do the same thing on the other side. So just create an image, and then we grab the Google SVG. And then after capturing the Google SVG, we write a paragraph and say Google. So it's quite straightforward. So this is quite straightforward, and the Google needs a capital G. Finally, what I want after this social login div, we create another paragraph. And then inside the paragraph, we add this text. So we can create a paragraph here and say, don't have an account yet. And then you can see we have a different style on this element. So we can use a span inside the paragraph, and then we can say sign. And that's it. That's it for the HTML markup. So let's go live and see what we do have. You can see we have all this. The images are too large, so we need first to start resizing these images. So we're going to start with the reset image, this one. So the reset image, let's give it a width and a height that is favorable to us. So we can do a width of 15 and a height of 15. So if you go back, you can see that one has been resized. But now let's do the same for the Facebook and the Google icon. So I come here and go to the Facebook. This one I'm going to use a bigger image, a bigger size. So I'm going to use a width of 20, a height of 20. You can change this and get a favorable height, and then copy this down to the Google icon. So this is the Google icon, and then Command V and save that. So if we go back, now the icons are small, but now the ocean image is too large. So let's resize the ocean image as well. The height I'm going to use, let's use something like 250. So you can say height to, let's see, height. This is in pixels, so we are going to use height 250 pixels. Right, so that looks nice. The very next thing we need to do now is, because we were too much focused on HTML, is let's start adding some styles. So the first thing I'm going to add is a font. The font I'm going to add is called Nonito. Let's go to Google's fonts. So we can say fonts.google.com. On top here, search for Nonito. You'll see you can either pick the Nonito Sans or the Nonito, just the Nonito font. And then here on the bottom, you'll see a button that says Get Font. Just click Get Font. And then you can see one font family selected. If you have more, you can just delete them here. They will be listed here. Then click on Embed Code, and then go to the import, and then copy the import. So just paste that in. And then now, because you have added the font, let's go to the body. Let's grab the body and specify the font family. So we can say font family. So you can do this by just selecting the font family here on top. You can see Nonito here on top. And then, or go to Google Fonts and see the font family specified and just copy it. You have two ways you could do that. I like writing it manually. So Nonito as a fallback. The fallback is used if Google Fonts is not reachable, or this is an offline website, or something happened. So we have a fallback font. That's it. Then the very next thing we now need to do is now add the default CSS styles. So we are done with Google Fonts. So let's add the default CSS styles. Those are very common. We have done this countless times. So it's a margin of 0, padding of 0, and a box sizing of border box. So these are just basic HTML CSS styles. And I talked about these in my previous tutorials, why we need them. So the very next thing, you can see the font has changed, and then let's start working on the project. So let's grab this whole section. The whole section, what I mean is this whole thing. So let's grab it, and we called it login. So we can say login. Let's first limit its width. We are going to use 550 pixels for the width. So we can say width 550 pixels. Right, you can see it still takes up the whole width. So let's see whether we give it a class of login. Yeah, that's it. And also the background color, you can see here we have a background color to the body. So let's go ahead and add that background color to the body. The background color is hash FF F2EF. right? And then in the login, let's make the background color white. So you can say background color here, white. Pretty straightforward. The next thing, we want to place this thing in the center. So we can go to the parent and say display flex. So display flex, and then justify content to the center. We'll do a tutorial on Flexbox so that you can understand more about the Flexbox. The next thing is that you can see this login form is too close to the edges. Let's add some paddings to the body. Let's say padding to rem. All right, that looks nice. The next thing now we need to talk about is how can we place this section on the left and the right hand section on the right. We have different ways we could do this. One of the way we could do this is by using Flexbox, but with Flexbox, it cannot create complex structures. So the next scenario we have is using grids. CSS grids are a bit not beginner friendly, but it's easier to understand. I'm just going to show you how the layouts work. So in the grid, you specify the number of columns and how much width each column should take. So what I'm going to do, let's go back to our live. And then we are going to display here grid. So you might notice whenever I do display grid, nothing happens because we have not specified how many columns do we want, how much width should each column take. So I'm going to use percentages. So I'm going to say grid template columns. Grid template columns. How many columns do I need in my container, the container that is holding the grid? So if I want 2 containers, how do I do it? We can use percentages, we can use fractions. If you ever know about fractions, we have different ways to do this. For this tutorial, I'm going to show you using percentages. So if I need 2 columns, I can just do, I want the first column to take 50%, the next column to take 50%. And that way I can create 2 equally spaced grids. And then let's add some paddings to this card. You can see everything is too close to the, let's add some paddings. Or maybe no, let's not add some padding here. Let's add some gaps. So to add a gap, you just write gap. And then we want a gap of maybe 0.8 rem. And the gap now separates the card sections. So as I said, whenever I do 50%, 50%, this should take equal spaces. So that we can illustrate this, let's grab the image in the image wrapper. So let's grab the image wrapper. So .image wrapper. And then the image, let's give it a width of 100%. Let's see. It takes up the whole width of its containing element. Its containing element has been given 50%. If you could use a ruler, you can see that this side is equal to this side. And then let's give it a height of 100%. So if we do that, it tries to take up 250 pixels as we specified here. So what we can do now is that let's use the image wrapper to limit the height of the image. So the image wrapper and do a height of maybe 220 pixels. And then you can see now the image has been limited in its height. So let's use viewport heights. Let's use like 40 viewport height. Let's do 60. I think you can work with that. And the next thing you might realize that the image is overstretched. So we can come here and say an object fit cover. And also, guys, before I forget, is that in my GitHub repository, all this code is there. So you can go and review this code as you would like. So the next thing we might want to talk about is that you can see now we gave this 50%. We created 2 columns. One is 50%, the other one is 50%. I could do this. The first one should be, let's do 60%, and the rest takes 40%. Now, our section is 60% width. This one is 40. We can go higher. Let's do 70 and 30. We continue moving. So this is how you can work with grids. You can learn more about grids, but I will still make a tutorial on grids. It's a very huge topic, but it's the backbone of every layout and also the flexbox. So what I chose is 55%. I think 55% that did its job. You can play around and see which one you'd like. So it's 55, 45, which is very nice also. The next thing is that you can see these edges are too sharp on the containing element. So we can go ahead and give it a border radius of 5 pixels. Then you can see nothing happens because the image is overflowing. So we can come here and say overflow hidden. All right, you can see now the edges look sharp as always, which is fantastic. So that's it on that section. So let's continue working on the content. On the content, the very, very first thing we see is that the content is too close to the edges. So let's grab the content. We can say dot content. Let's immediately give it a padding of 1 rem. Let's try 1 rem. All right, and then you can see the content has been pushed. Let's push it a bit higher so we can go 1.5 rem. And that looks nice. So let's continue now working through this. We need, the content has too many elements, the heading, the paragraph, the input, the forgot password, all these. So to make sure we can give some gaps between these elements and we can be able to style them as we want, let's use flexbox. So we are going to say display flex, flex direction. We need to specify the flex direction as column. And then the gap should be maybe 1 rem. Let's try 1 rem and see. Right. So that looks a bit okay. Let's do 0.7. All right. And then now if we do 0.7 rem there, let's go back to our image wrapper. Let's give it a height of 100%. And then the image should take the whole height as we expect. All right. So the next thing let's focus on now, we give these sections gaps. You can see we have given gaps. Let's work on the input itself. So this is the input. Let's give it some paddings and let's give it some life. That's it. So we can do input. Now the input, you're not going to target using a class, or you can just use the input. We can just use the input tag because we only have one input. If we had multiple inputs, then you could be now worried about adding some classes to these inputs to target individual inputs. So let's do a padding vertical of 8 pixels, horizontal 12 pixels. All right, that looks nice. Let's change the border. So we can go and say border of 0.8 pixels. We want a faded border, solid. RGB, let's do 128, 128, 128. You can see it is very nice. Let's add some border radius. So you can say border radius of 5 pixels. All right, so that looks nice and it's done. So the next thing, let's focus on this description. The text is too large. So we can now grab the description. We give it a class of description. And then let's do a font size of 0.8 rem. All right, so the font size now looks a bit nice. And then let's make its color grayish, so we can use hash 555. All right, so it looks nice now. So the next thing we need to talk about is this reset section. We give it a class of reset. So let me go and look for it. This is the section. It has 2 elements. It has a password, paragraph, forgot password, and a button. So we need to display this flex as well. So we can now do dot reset. We grab it by its class. So dot reset, and then display flex here, justify content, space between. All right, so we can see they are end to end, but they are not aligned in the middle. So we can do align items to the center, which is very nice. The next thing is that the button now and the arrow should be side by side as well. So we can grab that button. So we can grab the reset, dot reset, and then the button, but we can still go specifically and say the direct child button, so that in case you have other buttons inside divs of the reset, they are not going to be affected. So we can now do display flex here. Flex, let's do a gap. So I think we can do a gap of maybe 0.2 rem. And you can see it there. So the next thing we need to work on is the padding on the button. So we can do a padding of 5 pixels, 10 pixels, then a border of none. Let's remove the border, which looks nice. The very next thing I want to do is that let's create a CSS variable to hold this bluish color I'm going to use on the background. So we can say primary, and then the background color, the primary is 066586. The reason I used a CSS variable is that this color will be used quite often. So it's very good to just have it as a variable. You can say background color, and then you can use var, and then you grab the primary. So this using var is the variable. We created a CSS variable called primary, which holds this value. So whenever we want to evaluate that value, we can just do our variable and then specify the variable name using that syntax. All right, so the next thing is the color. Let's do a color of white. That looks nice now. You can see it. I think it looks nice. And then what else do we need to add on this button? I think it's okay. So the next thing, let's capture this paragraph text. So it is inside the reset. And then I want to just grab the sibling paragraph tags. So the reason I'm using siblings is that if I have a div here, and in this div, I also have a paragraph that says, hey. So if I say dot reset, then use the angle bracket right. So this is a greater than sign, and then grab the paragraph. It will only capture its siblings. So who are its siblings of the reset? This is the sibling, this is the sibling, and this is the sibling. The paragraph here isn't its sibling. So if I did not use the angle bracket and left it like that, then this selector will select even the nested child A. But if I go specifically and say grab the siblings, then I'm more specific and I don't have to care about this here won't be grabbed. Essentially, that's what I was meaning. All right. And then now in the paragraph, we reduce its, I think we can reduce its font. These paragraphs are too many. So I'm going to select all of them and say all paragraphs should have a font size of 0.75 rem. Let's use that. So you can see our paragraphs have been reduced as we expect. And then let's increase the gap between the login elements. So you can see maybe 1.4 rem. No, not that gap. You want the gap in the content. So let's look for the content. Let's do a gap of 1 rem. 1 rem is small. Let's use 1.4. Okay, so let's stick to that. And then now the paragraph here, what I want to do, I want to add to increase the font weight to something like 500. You can see it there. And then I think we can change also the color. Let's make it the primary color. So you can say color, then the variable, and then we say primary. You can see it, it looks a bit nice. So after that, let's move to this section. We're not going to touch the horizontal row. It has set itself as we expect. So this paragraph, we can give it a class. So this paragraph, let's give it a class of, so what name should we give this? We can give it a name of or login with. So let's use that class. Just that I don't know how to name that paragraph. Save. And then I'm going to capture it. And the very first thing I want to do is to align items to to align it to the center. So I can just use text align center. Can use that. It works and it has worked. So let's also make sure the color is a bit darkish. So you can say color. Let's use gray. I think gray is okay. All right, you can see it is faded out. The font size is a bit large, so let's reduce the font size to maybe 0.65 rem. All right, so then let's move on to the next section, which is the social buttons. So we first need to display them, flex, and then align them to the center. So we can just do .social login. I think I gave it a class of social login. All right, it's the same social login, and then on the social login we displayed flex, and then flex. Then let's add some gaps, maybe 0.3 rem, and then let's justify them to the center. So you can just say justify content to the center. And something else to note, that inside these buttons we have the icon and the paragraph text. So inside the button you also need to display them flex, and the button is under social login. So you can just do the same trick I showed you. We grab all the direct children who are buttons and then display flex here. You can see them, they have aligned themselves. And then you can see now this icon, the text is not in the middle. That's when you need to align items to the center. And then let's add some gaps. You can say gap 0.3 rem. Let's do 0.3 rem. And you can see the gap. The next thing, let's add some paddings to this button. So we can say padding of maybe vertical 7 pixels, horizontal 12 pixels. Fantastic. Let's reduce the border. So we can do border of 0.8 pixels, solid RGB 128. Let's save. Then you can see the buttons. Let's add some border radius. I like using 5 pixels, so you can just use 5 pixels here. They look nice. Let's now focus on the final section, which is the reset div. We give it a class of reset, not reset. So we didn't give it a class. So I think we can give it a class sign up call to action. So we can do a class of sign up CTA. So that's like a call to action. Let's copy this class and then we paste it in our CSS. So you can come here and say dot sign up CTA. I think we need to text align this. And then you can say text align to the center, which looks nice. Then this text, you saw it was having some different colors. It's inside the sign up CTA. So you can just grab sign up CTA and then the direct child span. Or because the span is inside it, we can just grab it and say color of var primary. You can see why we needed to use a CSS variable. And then after doing that, let's add text decoration of underline. That's it, guys. So that's how you can create such a form. It's quite simple. And so let me know in the comments, what do you think? And thank you for watching. Make sure you like and share with your friends and comment down below. Thank you.